Sure. Just give me like 10 seconds. I'm just eating something. Sorry, Jay.
Okay, no worries, please, sure.
Right, there we go. All done.
Great. So, ladies and gentlemen, welcome you again to the final webinar episode, on building brand experiences with Dr. Darren Coleman. So Darren has actually run us through the first two webinars. They were very well received by you, and thank you all for your feedback and actively participating in this initiative. The final webinar today, the theme of which is bringing brand experiences to life by leveraging brand experience enablers. Well, I'll hand it over to Darren now, and you can take it from there, please.
Sure, thank you, Jay. Hello, everyone. I'm delighted to be back for the third and final webinar, where we're talking about the role that brand experiences play in retaining relevance and driving long-term brand performance. So the objectives, what do I want to achieve today? So there's several things that I want to cover. First, I want to do a recap from the first 2 weeks, and then introduce the idea of the third and final component of the brand experience blueprint. These are the brand experience enablers, which relate to employee behavior, communications, and design. And these are really 3 tools that you can use to bring your brand to life through the experiences you build. And then finally, I want to provide a quick overview of how to measure brand experiences. So in terms of the journey that we've been on, our journey so far, on the 11th of September, we looked at the brand experience environment. So this is the context that brands are built within. And it's important to define and develop your brand experience essentials, which we covered in week 2, within the context of the environment, so that your brand experiences aren't built within a vacuum. So the brand experience essentials provide the building blocks for building your experiences. And that's where we move on to the third and final webinar today, where we look at the brand experience enablers. So last week, we looked at brand experience essentials in the form of values, essence, promise, positioning, personality. Today, we'll look at how you can use employee behavior, design, and communications to bring the brand experience essentials to life. And we'll also look at measurement. So in terms of a recap on weeks 1 and 2, so during the first webinar, I introduced the brand experience blueprint. This is a practical management tool that you can use to structure and guide an approach to building brand experiences. So the first stage that we looked at was the brand experience environment. So this is the context that your brand is built within. So these are the key factors that you need to be mindful of when it comes to defining and developing your brand, because by doing that, your brand will become more relevant because it's plugged into the factors that are driving brands today. So there were 4 elements within the brand experience environment. We looked at understanding stakeholders with the likes of Standard Chartered, profiling customers in Indonesia as an example. Then there was the idea of fine-tuning your perspective. So that was about things like value and transparency. And we focused on value during that week, with the idea being that there will be always somebody that can say they can do something cheaper. So sometimes you've got to know the value that you deliver into the market and when to walk away from a bad deal. The idea of considering the mechanics of delivery, we looked at the importance of emotion and the idea that both emotion and thinking drive performance, but the influence of emotion as a ratio to rational cognitive thought was 1.5. Then there were some examples from the Indian market. So All Out's Stand By Tough Mums, and that was very emotional and empathetic, really lovely campaign. And Marigold's Startup program was very empathetic, and it understood that mums wanted to do much more with their lives. So then when we look at understanding a data-driven approach, we looked at robust insights, and we looked at statistical methods that can reduce brand exposure to risk. But also as well, whilst I understand that numbers talk in the boardroom, I'd also encourage you not to forget obtaining thick data, so qualitative data, because it provides rich and contextual insights that quantitative data can struggle to deliver. So we looked at an example of how a university was positioned. We used multidimensional folding to understand positioning objectively. And then I gave the example of an investment bank that identified its values through qualitative research, but then used a statistical method called regression to identify the values that drove performance. So last week, we looked at the brand experience essentials. These are intangible brand assets that guide and structure your approach to building brand experiences, and they need to be defined and developed in the context of the brand experience environment, so they have relevance. An unfortunate number of brands are defined in a vacuum. They're not mindful of stakeholders, and they're not mindful of data, the mechanics of delivery, etc. And as a result, the experiences that are built on that brand lack relevance. We looked at the idea of avoiding jargon. So yes, brand values, but maybe think about how would you describe your brand in 4 or 5 words. We looked at Bank of Singapore for building on your values as an example, and Marico, how they were looking at a digital classroom, which implied values of being caring and considerate and progressive. The idea of brand essence. So if you were going to sum up your brand in 2 or 3 words, what would you say it's all about? So we looked at Nike and their essence of authentic athletic performance, Disney, fun, family entertainment. And essence is important because it provides a platform for brand-driven growth. And we looked at how the relationship amongst the S&P 500 companies in the last 20, 25 years has inversed, where the value resides in intangible assets as opposed to tangible assets. The brand promise related to the benefits, not the features you deliver. So we looked at the idea of the Lifebuoy infection alert system, which was a wonderful idea, an experience that supports the key benefit that the brand delivers of protection against germs. Then with positioning, it was about how you're different to your competitors. And we looked at Vodafone and how it repositioned 4G around value and quality in the light of a new entrant in the form of Jio coming into the Indian market and commoditizing the technology. And then we looked at Triodos as well with ethical banking. And finally, we looked at personality. So that's if you were to describe your brand as a person, who would they be? And that capitalizes on humans' natural tendency to make non-living things living, so we can connect with them and relate to them in emotional terms. And then we looked at Kate Moss at Burberry, the Marlboro Man, and Virat Kohli, who has brand endorsements with the likes of Audi, Puma, Tissot, etc. So when it comes to defining and developing your brand experience essentials, it's important to do that in the context of the brand experience environment. So for example, your values need to be mindful of your stakeholders. Your values need to think about fine-tuning your perspective. So are they transparent? Do they engage with stakeholders? Are they focused not just on price, but value, etc.? The same with your essence. How does it connect with stakeholders? How does it tie in with the perspective? How does it tie in with the mechanics of delivery? Is it driven by data? So what we've covered in the first 2 weeks is at a high level, the brand experience environment, which are the large scale macro factors that are driving brands' agenda today. And then we looked at the brand experience essentials, which are intangible brand assets, which you need to define and develop in the context of the brand experience environment. Today, we're going to move to the 3rd and final stage, which looks to bring the brand experience essentials to life through brand experience enablers. So the brand experience enablers are design, communications, and behavior. So for example, if one of your values is to be caring, your employees need to be caring and behave in a way that embodies that value. The design that you have, the communications that you take out into the market need to be caring. Because if they're not all caring, then the consistency of the experiences you deliver fall apart. But regrettably, most people, when they're building brand experiences, jump straight to the design and communication stage. but they haven't thought about the brand at an intangible level, and worse still, they won't have thought about the brand in the context of the environment. And that's why, regrettably, a lot of brand experiences through design and communications lack relevance. So at this stage, you should be thinking, right, my brand is relevant, values, essence, promise, positioning, personality, because it's plugged into the key factors that are driving brands in business today, i.e. the brand experience environment. So the brand experience essentials have been defined and developed in the context of the brand experience environment, and that's what gives your brand relevance. But the challenge is that brand values, brand essence, etc., they're all intangible brand assets. This makes brand problematic in the C-suite, but we also need to give customers and other stakeholders clues as to what our brand is all about, so they can make a decision as to whether it's relevant for them. So I could say that my brand is caring, but we need to show customers and other stakeholders that your brand is caring. So to move from the intangible world of brand to the more tangible world of brand experiences, then we use the brand experience enablers. And these are comprised of employee behavior, communications, and design. So more specifically, employee behavior is about aligning brand and HR. So if your brand has been positioned as being socially responsible, then when it comes to recruiting, training, inducting, and rewarding behavior, it needs to support behavior that is socially responsible. For communications, if your brand is bold, then the communications need to be bold, strong language, confident language. It wouldn't be gentle or hesitant. When it comes to design, if your brand is young, vibrant, energetic, then when it comes to multisensory, you need to orchestrate all of the senses: sight, taste, touch, sound, scent. So use all of the senses as an orchestra, combine them so that you can bring your brand to life. A lot of retail brands do this, airlines do this to support the positioning and the brand personality. So for example, when you get onto a British Airways flight, the music that you hear is very different to the music you would hear when you get onto a Virgin Atlantic flight, because the positioning of the brands is completely different. But also within design, it's important thing about service design. So when it comes to designing customer journey maps, customer journey blueprints, etc., service prototyping, if your brand is caring, then the way in which the service is designed needs to demonstrate you are caring. And this compels customer centricity and empathy, which lies at the heart of brand experiences. So I want to give you an example of how a brand brought behavior to life. So we've got a picture of Japan, Thailand, Air India, 2 cans of Heineken and a cricket bat. You're probably sitting there thinking, Darren's gone mad. But there is a story behind this. About 20 years ago, I used to live in Japan. My first tropical experience as a holiday was going to Thailand with 4 friends that I used to work with in an English school. We flew with Air India. When I got onto the flight, one of the flight attendants started saying to me, "Do you like cricket?" And I don't really know a lot about cricket, but I humoured him and we had a chat. And then he sat down and he said, "Would you like a drink?" I thought, yeah, that'd be great, thank you. So he goes, "What would you like?" I said, "I'll just have a beer." And the other guys will have a beer. So he kindly brought us 2 cans of beer. I fly an awful lot. Air India to this day is the only airline I've ever flown with that has given me 2 cans of beer when I've only asked for 1. So in the context of the brand experience blueprint, what does this mean? Well, there was a behavioural element of the experience that I encountered. And that showed personality for the brand, but also delivered a key benefit, hospitality. And then when you think about how that behavior, which delivered the personality and promise, would have been ideally designed in the context of the environment, well, they profiled me, they understood me as a customer, and they saw that I was with friends. 20 years ago, we were younger, more interested in drinking and the rest of it. So, they were thinking, right, one of the jobs they want to get done is have fun. They exceeded my expectations. They focused on value, not price. So this is an example of how that behavioral experience, which has stayed with me ever since, which was delivering a part of the promise and the personality, was grounded in these elements of the brand experience blueprint. The next one that I want to show you is an emotional story from Procter & Gamble.
Você tá bem. Você tá bem. Difícil. Desculpa. Deixa eu ver mais um pouquinho. Tá menino, custa de montar. E aí, gatinha? Tu tá indo pra onde? Tu tá indo pra onde? Sai, passa, Cita! Puxa vida. Mas a tia, 你可以P&G, proud sponsor of moms.
So that's a beautifully constructed brand masterclass in storytelling from Procter & Gamble. But really what they were doing as part of a larger campaign for the London Olympics was acknowledging mums as the hidden heroes in families. They're the spine of families that often go unnoticed, unrecognized, etc. And they were making a very strong statement to say thank you. So it wasn't so much about ramming the product brand down people's throats. It was far more subtle. It was a story that was emotive that people could identify and relate to. So if we tie this in with the brand experience blueprint, so it was communication, it was a story, and it showed the personality of Procter & Gamble at a corporate level, and also brought the values of the brand to life in a very emotive way. And then that was very much about profiling the customers. They understood the target customer was the mum. It was about engaging with them. It wasn't about price, but value. It was very emotional, and it was clearly built on robust insights. So you can see how there's this ripple effect that because these types of brands understand what's happening within the brand experience environment, then they've built brands that are relevant, and then they bring that brand to life through communications that delivers a relevant experience. So this was an example of co-created communication from DBS.
Story was like a typical Bollywood film. Boy meets girl, girl meets boy. They fall in love. Random food dates, crazy fun adventures, winning over our parents, chasing dreams, opening our own restaurant, and finally, a happy ending. Sounds good, doesn't it? But what follows is not exactly a plot of a Bollywood film. If that was a dream, this is the reality through my eyes.
So here, they've started to create a narrative around two people that are ideally target customers, and then you've got the...
Table number 5.
So this is a normal day through my eyes. Broken pipes, blunt knives, delayed orders, temperamental chefs. And in the middle of all of this, there is Asha, my darling workaholic, Asha.
The vendors just called saying that the supplies...
That's okay, the vendors can wait. Hey, Asha, I love you.
Sasha,
Asha, Asha, I quit.
the paint is coming
And
out.
I'm taking my lovely fiancé with me to Goa.
Great idea. What about all these checks and Reshma's salary?
Asha,
Do we
Reshma's
consider
not my
this a paid
fiancé.
leave?
You are. Our bank can handle all of this. Now give me that pen.
No.
We're going. I don't care. We're going. All right, I'm booking the tickets.
Goa. What's the plan?
So then they've got the option to have an ambitious break here or here. Let's select this one.
Asha, come back. The border's flying. Asha, come. I'm going to pull you in. I'm going to pull you in. Hold it tight, Ken.
Asha, do you remember the last time we spent a day doing absolutely nothing? Let's just stay here forever.
Maybe.
Thanks. You know, I don't want to enter a restaurant kitchen for the next 2 years. I'm serious.
Hello,
Hi.
madam.
Hi.
What can Pedro Fernandez present you with? You name it, Pedro, make it.
Chicken.
Yeah,
No,
we're
sir.
thinking.
Sir, if I oblige you with the chili paneer, chef's special, you will love it.
Okay.
Okay.
Mom, we're here for just a few more days, okay? I'll call you once I'm back. Okay, bye. What happened?
It's really bad.
Excuse me, what seems to be the problem?
I think there's something missing.
Missing? This is Chef Pedro's specials. And you're telling me missing?
No.
Everybody
I'm-
comes here to eat, and I give the best for the guest. And you are challenging me? You think you are better cook than me?
No.
Look, I know what good food is.
Come on, show me. I'm challenging you right now.
So then you can accept the challenge or reject the challenge. So that was, oops.
Darren, your voice is breaking up a bit. Sorry to interrupt.
Okay,
Yeah, it's better now, I think. Yeah.
right, apologies.
Sure.
Yeah. So that story keeps continuing, but it's powerful because people will become emotionally invested. One, because they'll identify with the people within the story, but they have an element of control over how the story develops. So here you had a story that was about communications. It was a promise. So really a key part of the brand promise here was to help people to live their dream. It was about how can I live the life I'd love to live. So it was very much about profiling the customers, engaging them, value, an element of loss of control because they let people design the campaign. It was very emotive. It was about co-creation and based on robust insights. So here we have an example of how a story was developed that delivered a promise, will help you finance the life you'd love to live. But that was tied in with ideas of key parts of the brand experience environment. So then when we look at design, this was an example from Dunkin' Donuts.
The capital of Korea, Seoul, is nicknamed the City of Coffee. There are over 200 Starbucks coffee shops and even more local cafes in Seoul. Even so, the coffee industry is still growing and competition between cafes is becoming even more intense. Dunkin' Donuts projects the image of a donut shop more so than a coffee shop. And as such, other places than Dunkin' most often come to mind when people are looking for a place to have coffee. Mission: encourage people to choose coffee at Dunkin' Donuts. The terrible traffic congestion in Seoul results in people commuting to work primarily via public transportation, on buses and subways. These people are busy, and so they stop by cafes on their way to work.
Darren, sorry to interrupt. We can only see the single DBS slide. Unfortunately, the next slide has not come up. Please.
Oh dear. Right.
Yeah. So I think it's an issue with the frozen slide. So we got a few questions also on that. Yeah.
Can you still see the screen now?
Yes, it's still the DBS screen, please.
All right. It's moved forward for me.
No, I am afraid it's stuck on the same place.
So is the best thing that I leave the call and dial back in?
I think that can be done. It shouldn't take too. Ladies and gentlemen, just bear with us. Darren will just log out and log in a minute or so.
Apologies, everyone.
Sure.
Hello, Jay.
Yeah, Darren, you're audible, but we can't see your screen yet. Yeah, now you're back online.
Right. Okay. I'm sorry about that, everyone. So if I give the explanation, can you see the screen now, the brand experience blueprint?
Yes. That's where we are at.
I think moving between different technology. So apologies, everyone. So the idea there was for DBS, they created a story, but what they did is they used that to convey a key brand promise that they would help finance people so they could fund their dreams and live the life they would love to live. And that was tied in with the idea of profiling stakeholders, engaging them in emotional ways, focusing on value, not price. There was an element of a loss of control because they delegated the campaign to people, so they had choice. It was very emotive, and the campaign was co-created, but it was based on robust insights. So here what we've got is communication that delivered a brand promise, but that brand promise was relevant because it had plugged into various elements of the brand experience environment. Can you still hear me, Jay, and see the screen?
You can see still see the screen. You're on brand experience blueprint.
Brilliant. Can you see Feeling Hungry?
Yes. Now it's changed back, please. Yeah.
Great.
The next slide, Feeling Hungry.
The capital of Korea, Seoul, is nicknamed the City of Coffee. There are over 200 Starbucks coffee shops and even more local cafes in Seoul. Even so, the coffee industry is still growing, and competition between cafes is becoming even more intense. Dunkin' Donuts projects the image of a donut shop more so than a coffee shop. And as such, other places than Dunkin' most often come to mind when people are looking for a place to have coffee. Mission: encourage people to choose coffee at Dunkin' Donuts. The terrible traffic congestion in Seoul results in people commuting to work primarily via public transportation, on buses and subways. These people are busy, and so they stop by cafes on their way to work. How do we approach these people? Idea: release the aroma of coffee along with radio advertisements. After analyzing the Dunkin' Donuts jingle, we created a machine that releases a coffee aroma. The machine is triggered only by the sound of the Dunkin' Donuts jingle. This jingle was inserted at the top of the Dunkin' Donuts radio ad. When a Dunkin' Donuts ad plays on the radio, a coffee aroma is simultaneously released. Those who noticed the aroma while listening to the ad exhibited some surprised responses. Through positioning, when they exit at their bus stop, they see the Dunkin' Donuts shop in front.
Dunkin' Donuts.
오빠 것도 사왔어.
와, 근데 어디 커피야? 향이 참 좋다.
바로 요 앞에 있는 던킨.
던킨 커피가 이번에 내리는 당신을 기다립니다.
They are much more inclined to make their stop at Dunkin'. Results: more than 350,000 people experienced the ad during the campaign. Visitors increased 16%. Sales of Dunkin' Donuts located by bus stops increased 29%. The ideal result is that people are now starting to think of Dunkin' Donuts when they think of their morning coffee. Coffee and donuts. Dunkin' Donuts.
So there's a few points to note about this case study. First, that's several years old, so it shows how advanced a number of brands are. Secondly, it also highlights the limitations of building a brand around a category, i.e. donuts, because you never know if you want to stretch or extend, pivot your business into adjacent markets. But interestingly with this, what happened was it was designed, so it was very multisensory, taste, touch, sound, scent. The ethics could be debated as well, but it was a multisensory brand experience. And it was very much about not positioning, but repositioning the brand. So very much to do with profiling the customers, engaging them at a number of levels. It was emotive because scent has direct links to the emotional receptors in the brain. It was omni-channel, spanned a variety of media, and it was clearly based on robust insights that the brand was starting to lose relevance because its association with donuts and people weren't going there for a coffee. So that's an example of how a brand would have potentially used this blueprint to arrive at that sort of multisensory experience. So I want to have a quick look at measuring brand experiences, because this is part of the puzzle that a lot of people struggle with. So the first thing that I would say is brands are built from within. And there's two really lovely quotes here from Sir Richard Branson and Hervey from Southwest. So this is the importance of employees is particularly important for services brands, and even more so for B2B services brands, where the behavioral element comes into sharper focus. So if you're going to go down this route of competing through experiences, I understand the importance of big data, i.e. digital transformation, but fundamentally humans have a need to connect with each other. And that's where the behavioral element of experiences is coming into play. And that's why people go to coffee shops. They could quite happily have a coffee at home, but they choose to go to a communal area where they can interact and or at least be close to people. So the first point, employees play a critical part in delivering brand experiences. Secondly, there's the idea of brand equity and the lag effect. So this was a really interesting quote from Indra Nooji, who was the former CEO of PepsiCo, and she's saying that there's a lag effect with brand investments. So it's not like a direct marketing campaign where you could send out an email shot and you'll see a spike in sales the next day or two. It takes time to build a brand, so the time lag comes into effect. And that's a challenge, because I understand that CEOs and CFOs want to see short-term returns. But on the flip side, brand equity is powerful because it acts as a crystal ball for the future. Because if your brand metrics and indeed your employee metrics are dropping, as sure as night follows day, the financial metrics will drop. So if you're measuring your employee and brand metrics carefully, you'll be well placed to take preemptive action before the financial metrics suffer. So when it comes to measuring brand experiences, yes, financial metrics are important. So contribution margin, profit at a gross or net level, revenues, EBITDA. I understand that money talks in the boardroom, but financial metrics have a number of problems. Firstly, they're short term. Even with sophisticated econometric modeling, it's very difficult to predict beyond a few quarters with any meaningful sense of accuracy. Secondly, financial metrics are primarily historical. If sales were down for the last quarter or the last half, you can kick, scream, cry and shout all you want, but nothing can do that. It's a bit like driving a car but looking in the rear view mirror. It's the history, the historical. Also as well, financial metrics are very ROI driven. So that's quite short term, and that counters the long-term strategic mentality that's required to invest and build brands and the experiences. So then there's the other parts of the puzzle to think about employee measures, such as relative satisfaction, advocacy, loyalty, etc., brand knowledge, work experience that's provided. Because if employees are happy, that will drive financial metrics. Then you've got the idea of brand metrics, premium prices, perceptions of quality, share of voice, awareness, etc. But time and time again, we see this relationship with our clients, that employee measures drive brand measures, and both employee and brand measures drive financial metrics. So if you want to drive financial metrics, it's about understanding cause and effect. Cause being employee and brand measures, because if they're dropping, financial measures will drop. But if the employee and brand metrics are increasing, that trickles through into the financial metrics. And you can use methods such as structural equation modeling to really get under the skin of these methods. So I just wanted to revisit the idea of short-term financial metrics and the dangers of being ROI driven. So in 2015, venture capitalist 3G Capital Partners from Brazil, they bought Kraft Heinz. And 3G Capital Partners are well known for being aggressive cost cutters. And what you can see here is the destruction of Heinz brands. So yes, there was a slight uptake here, but that's the residual value of the brand. And you can see that withdrawn investment from brands, cut costs, haven't invested, and slowly but surely the brand has declined in terms of stock value. So if that's not a powerful message to people in the C-suite, well, I really don't know what else is. So that was just a whirlwind tour of measuring brand experiences. So if we have a look at the journey that we've covered so far, on the first webinar, we looked at the brand experience environment. This was the context brands are built within. And you need to understand this context. So when it comes to defining and developing your brand experience essentials, values, essence, promise, positioning, personality, which we covered in the second webinar, the brand that you define and develop will be more relevant because it's plugged in to stakeholders, the perspective that's pervading markets today, data, etc. So the way in which to define and develop a relevant brand is by doing that in a way that dovetails with the brand experience environment. But then once you've got your brand, this intangible asset that's being defined in that way to drive relevance, you need to bring it to life. And the way that you bring a brand to life is primarily through three tools, the brand experience enablers: employee behavior, communications, and design. Regrettably, most brands jump straight to the brand experience enabler stage, primarily design and/or communications. But the problem is they have no guiding principle because the brand hasn't been clearly defined and articulated. And even if it has, most brands aren't defined and developed and articulated in the context of the brand experience environment. So that means the experiences that bring the brand to life lack relevance. And time again, this is why we see experiences delivered into the market that don't resonate with stakeholders. So there's a three-step process, an iterative, sequential process that we've tried to guide you through in the form of the brand experience blueprint for building brand experiences. And then we looked at the idea of measurement and the idea that it's important to measure employee and brand metrics because they drive financial metrics. And it's important to measure that causal relationship. So in terms of the objectives, what did I want to achieve today? Well, I wanted to provide a recap from the first 2 weeks, primarily relating to the brand experience environment and enablers. Sorry, brand experience environment and essentials. And then today we're focused on the enablers. So these are the tools that you can use to bring your brand to life: employee behavior, communications, and design. And then I've tried to provide an overview of how to measure brand experiences. So I believe that Jay has kindly shared table 3, and this poses some of the questions that you should ask yourself when it comes to bringing your brand experiences to life. So connecting the brand experience essentials and the enablers. So for examples, when it comes to the values and behavior, you need to recruit employees that will behave in a way that support your values. Communications, how can you use social media to bring your values to life in engaging ways? How can you use design to bring your values to life? So what you've got on the left here is the core of the brand that should be more relevant if it's defined and developed in the context of the brand experience environment. And then you bring it to life through employee behavior, communications, and design, i.e. the experiences that you take to market. So the final opportunity to ask a question and being with a chance of winning a copy of my book. So, which brand experience enabler is most important to your organization and why? Please send me your thoughts to be in with a chance of winning a copy of my book, and I would love to hear from you. Finally, a number of you have connected with me on LinkedIn. I'd be very happy to connect with more of you, so please do stay in touch. That's it. They're the 3 weeks. I hope you found it useful. It's been a pleasure and a privilege to be invited here, and I'm very grateful for you taking the time out of your busy schedules to let me share these thoughts around building brand experiences. So I'll hand over to Jay for any questions. There's my phone number and email. If anyone has any questions after the session or now, please don't hesitate to ask.
Darren, a wonderful conclusion, and on behalf of CII and our entire membership, I would like to thank you for sparing so much of your time and effort to, connect with the audience and share your perspectives on brand experience. So I have a few questions that have come up, and I'll put them to you, one by one. The first one is, this is a brand that's saying that they have had difficulties in aligning brand values and employee behavior. Because of the fact that attrition is a big problem in many Indian firms, especially service firms. So in that case, for an organization to imbibe brand values in employees becomes difficult. Any advice that you might have for a brand that's faced with such a problem?
Sure. Go back to how you have defined those values, and that results in a number of things. Firstly, are those values only relevant to the brand itself, most notably and usually the senior management, or are those values relevant to a variety of stakeholders, including your employees? So that will feed into your employer brand. So that's the first thing. You need to assess how relevant the values of your brand are, not only to customers, but employees, investors, members of the community, etc. And the second point is, a lot of companies think they've got brand values, but actually they are behaviors. So for example, a lot of companies would have professionalism as a value or innovation, professionalism isn't a value, it's a behaviour. Professionalism is based on a value such as being diligent or dedicated. Because if I'm if I'm diligent, it ultimately results in behaviour that is professional. So that's the first point. A lot of people articulate values that are actually behaviours. And thirdly, a lot of values are so broad that they could mean a variety of things. So again, being professional. What is professional to me and what is professional to you could be very different. But being quite specific about the definition of a value, so being diligent, it reduces the scope for misunderstanding and interpretation of that value. So then you can make it really clear about what being diligent means when it plays out in behavior. So we see that time and time again. Values are defined based on convenience. They're actually behaviors, not values, and they're very, very generic. But for a services brand, you're right, it's particularly important.
Darren, another question is, though you might have covered elements of this in earlier webinars also, how do we change the brand experience of a brand which is already very old and has a legacy image? So basically, it's a legacy brand that tries to, change the brand experience paradigm. Any suggestions that you might have?
Firstly, having a brand with heritage and history is marketing gold dust. You're very fortunate to be in that position. The story that underpins that brand is something that should be used and celebrated, firstly, because a lot of brands with heritage can try to hide it because it feels stale. What you have to do is look at that story and think about the principles that have driven that story and then reinvent them in the context of today's world. And you see this with the likes of Cadbury. So Cadbury, for example, has got a very strong heritage and history in terms of local communities, local investment, things like that. And granted, it's doing less given its recent takeover, but that's still quite core to what the brand's trying to do. So my first piece of advice is don't try and hide the heritage. It's an asset that a lot of other brands would give their right arm for. But secondly, understand what that story is and why that story has made you great, and then think about how the principles related to that story can be translated in a modern day era. And yeah, that's it. You can be traditionally modern. So we looked at Burberry last week as a personality, and Burberry's been going for some time. They hold true to certain design principles, but the way in which they bring those principles to life through the experiences and their collections is very relevant, increasingly relevant, and that's why they're being successful. So I'd encourage you to have a look at the principles of the brand, the principles of the brand story, and then interpret them in ways that are relevant for your stakeholders today. Yeah, it's a common challenge, but don't hide the brand. It's a really valuable asset you've got there. I hope that answers that question.
Darren, the next one is, you talked in one of your slides about, financial metrics and ROI not being a very good indicator, brand performance.
Yeah.
But, one of the questions is that in India, financial metrics are considered, the end all and be all of all branding initiatives. So how do I, as a general manager, convince the C-suite and the board to actually look beyond the short term?
Sure. There's some fantastic research that has been conducted by two guys called Binet and Field, B-I-N-E-T and Field, through the Institute of Practicing Advertisers, and it's been a really extensive study, and it's demonstrated in no uncertain terms the value that brands deliver in terms of financial performance. And how you can go about building brands. So I would encourage people that face that challenge to look at that type of research, so then they can go to the C-suite armed with data to demonstrate the business case for building brands. I spend half of my life doing that, I'm afraid. And that's how we go about doing it. Also, as well, start small and build up from there. So start when I mean start small, get some employee metrics, get some brand metrics, tie those in with financial metrics and model them statistically, and show how over time, when employee and brand metrics increase, it ripples through to financial performance, or vice versa in a negative way. And by adopting that statistical and scientific approach, you will absolutely command more respect in the C-suite. And they're the two bits of advice I would give you.
Darren, one more question and also an appreciation. You know, the slide on feeling hungry with the Dunkin' Donuts example was fascinating and very innovative. You know, in India, one of the challenges for brands is basically the infrastructure that is available to use to deliver a brand experience. For example, Korea has a far better, you know, infrastructure in terms of connectivity and other things than India. So, you know, any suggestions that you might have on that front as to how we can leverage basic internet to maybe reach out to people?
Yeah, you have to work with what you've got, I'm afraid. And even then, old school SMS can actually work quite effectively, assuming that you've got people's consent to communicate with them one-to-one. So as long as you've got opt-in and you've got consent to engage with them, you know, we've seen a number of very effective campaigns that even deal with SMS, just as that infection alert did. That was about phoning people or sending them an SMS. So yeah, you have to work, but emerging and growing economies, we've seen this especially in countries like the Philippines and Indonesia, they've actually leapfrogged a lot of more advanced, supposedly advanced and developed markets, because they haven't bothered with fixed line internet. They've gone straight to 4G, so, or 3G or 4G. So yeah, I understand the point. It's a challenge. For mobile, don't overlook things like SMS, communicating through messaging, WhatsApp, messaging applications are fairly light touch. More brands are starting to do that. Yeah, so I understand that's a limitation. But even older school advertising that people may feel lacks relevance, you know, TV advertising, radio. If you look at people like Mark Ritson in Marketing Week and the data they've shared, you know, they're still showing that big campaigns on above the line through TV are still powerful. So yeah, it's about understanding the media that your stakeholders consume and then engaging with them through that media.
Darren, I think this is the second last question so far. So for a B2B product, there is no service delivery, usually in terms of, you know, directly to the consumer. So what role in this case can an employee play in, you know, sharing the message out with consumers? Because it's a product that's on a shelf which, you know, organizations or people buy.
Yeah, that's a very good question. Well, there's two angles to that. Firstly, there is a service experience to B2B, because if I'm selling widgets or parts to another company, then there's the service element for the B2B sales. But also as well, there's the fact that employees will be advocates and ambassadors for the brand. There is nothing worse than asking someone who works at a company about a product sitting under a brand and they say, I don't know, or worse still, I don't care. I remember when I used to work at Orange, and they were very careful to make sure we were informed and educated around the latest devices, the latest tariffs, when 3G was launched, etc. Because when you're working for such a high profile brand, invariably you almost become a mobile phone consultant to your family and friends and everyone you meet on your travels. So through that, we were well placed to actually act as advocates for the brand. And Orange was exceptionally, to go back to another point that somebody else about values, Orange was exceptionally careful about the people that it recruited. I remember going to a recruitment process that lasted several days, and 4 of us got the various jobs. And at the time, I thought it was a coincidence that the 4 people I got on with all got the jobs. But actually, Orange was very careful and very scientific to make sure that it recruited people that had got the values that sat with the brand. And then once you were in Orange, working there, they continuously educated you on the brand and the product. So if anyone asked you a question, you were well placed to answer those questions. So your employees should be very powerful brand ambassadors and advocates for you. They really should.
So Darren, this is more like, a call to action for you. So one of our participants, requests, and I think that's on behalf of all of us, that, with your wonderful perspectives, you come to India very soon and we get to hear you in person and see you and meet you perhaps. So I think that's a lovely, note to which, on which we can end.
Oh, it would be my pleasure. I know we've had discussions about the conclave, so it would be my pleasure to come to India and hopefully meet a few of the people that have been kind enough to attend this webinar. Yeah.
Sure. Thanks, Darren. I think that's it for the day. And once again, a very special thank you. In fact, we'll share a token of appreciation with you sometime. Thank you for joining in and for sparing your time for this. And we look forward. CII looks forward to working with you. To get the message across to the larger Indian industry. Thanks again, Darren.
Pleasure. Thank you, everyone. Have a great weekend.
You too, Darren. Bye-bye. See you.
Bye-bye.